This story just goes to show that animal attacks can happen to even the most experienced and cautious hikers and campers. The tragedy occurred in September 2023 and shook the residents of the province of Alberta. Doug Inglis, aged 62, and Jenny Gussy, also 62, had been together since university. They lived in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada. They were inseparable, both working as technicians in the same scientific lab. They had a deep love for the great outdoors and were certainly no stranger to the challenges that it can sometimes present. They each carried with them vital survival kits and emergency equipment every time they ventured into the wilderness. They traveled out to Banff National Park twice a year, usually once in the spring and once in the fall. But the national park is home to some of the deadliest predators in Canada, grizzly bears. There are thought to be 65 individuals that call Banff home, with a further 20 to 40 black bears too. A family member said that Doug and Jenny were very careful people when they were on their adventures in the wilderness, whether it be hiking, camping, canoeing, or whitewater rafting. They knew bear protocol, and they followed it to a T. But sometimes, with even the best precautions in place, people can find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. The pair had with them their sidekick and hiking companion, their dog. The three of them stuck to signposted routes and always adhered to any warnings displayed throughout the park. But on that fateful trip in late September 2023, there were no warnings. No bears had been sighted in that area, and there had been no reports of them from visitors. They were on day 5 of a week-long visit to the park, something they looked forward to every year. They were making their way along Red Deer River Valley, west of Yahatinda Ranch. This valley is an untouched landscape within the park. It is inaccessible to most hikers, with no roads leading in or out of it. Meadows give way to mature spruce forests, and towering above the valley floor are craggy mountain tops and glacial cirques. The area is home to some fascinating wildlife, including elk, moose, wolves, grizzly bears, and cougars. The landscape is simply stunning, but its remoteness isn't for the faint of heart, and it has its dangers. After the 5th day's hiking, the couple found a spot to camp for the night. They hadn't made it to the planned camping spot, but wanted to set up before it got dark. They knew bears posed a real threat and didn't want to run into one as the sun set. It was a sensible decision. They had time to set up their tent and cook dinner before night fell. As the three of them settled around the campfire, Doug sent a notification message using their Garmin InReach to his uncle, Colin Inglis. The message said they hadn't made the planned campsite, but were setting up camp now. The message pinged through at 5 p.m. It was the reassurance their family needed, and it was yet another safety precaution the cautious couple took whilst hiking in the backcountry. They checked in with family twice every day, but what the couple didn't know was that there was a grizzly bear on the prowl that evening. As the weather begins to get colder, bears enter a hyperphagic state in which they gorge themselves on as much food as possible before the winter. It's essential for them to pack in the calories and pack on the pounds. They need to make it through the long, cold, dark winter months, all the way through to springtime. Something alerted the bear to their presence. Perhaps it was their scent, the smell of their dinner, or the clinking of pots and pans as they cleared away their dinner. Whatever happened, their bear came for them. The couple, being experienced campers and bear-wise, had hung up their food in a nearby tree so as not to attract bears into their tent. They also kept with them a can of bear spray each. After dinner, Doug and Jenny crawled into their tent with their dog. As night fell and darkness engulfed Banff National Park, the two of them sat up reading on their e-readers, something they did every night before settling down. But outside, a grizzly bear was approaching the tent. They could hear it sniffing just the other side of the canvas. They stayed still and as quiet as possible, hardly daring to breathe. Then, terrifyingly, it slashed through the canvas and tried to grab the couple inside. The dog growled and barked, and Doug and Jenny tried to scare it away, yelling at it. Doug reached for his bear spray and emptied the canister at the bear. But in a fury, the bear fought back. Nobody knows exactly what happened during those horrifying moments, but one of them sent an SOS message from the Garmin, which Doug's uncle received. It said, "Bear attack, bad."
So last Monday, they started out. And Monday night, like every other time, at the end of the day, I would get an in-reach message saying, "We're at our destination, everything's okay." On Friday night, same thing. At 4:52, I got a message saying, "We're delayed, but everything's okay." And that message would mean that they were in a camp, their camp was set up, they were probably making dinner, and they were messaging myself and Jenny's mom with that message to say that things were good. 8:15, the phone rings. I got a phone call from Garmin, who InReach belongs to, and the message was, "We've had an SOS message," and the SOS, not only was the SOS activated, which is a button, but there was a message input into the InReach that said, "Bear attack bad." So at that point, we knew something was happening that was very bad, that they were in trouble.
The distress message also immediately alerted a wildlife human attack response team. This emergency GPS device was yet another piece of equipment the well-prepared couple always carried with them. It was potentially a life-saving device. The response team were deployed immediately, but the use of a chopper was out of the question due to poor weather and poor visibility. This was a serious blow. The rescue team knew that after a bear attack, every second counts, and now they were forced to make the journey on foot. They were specially trained individuals with mountaineering and medical training, specifically to attend to animal attack victims. Marching through the Canadian wilderness, they didn't know what they were going to find at the location. Nobody knew if the victims were dead or alive. They had to traverse the steep, rocky terrain in the dead of night, their flashlights illuminating the way. They knew they were walking into danger. They knew that a bear was out there, and yet they had to keep going to try and reach the couple in desperate need. At 1 o'clock in the morning, 5 hours after they received the distress signal, the rescuers arrived at the couple's camp. The scene they arrived at was distressing. They could see signs of a struggle, and, tragically, they could see 3 dead bodies, those of Doug and Jenny, and that of their dog. The grizzly bear had rampaged through the camp, destroying everyone in it. The 3 of them lay on the ground outside the tent. As they scouted around the campsite, they tried to piece together what had happened. The food was still hung up in the trees, and lying on the ground were 2 cans of bear spray. They were empty. The tent was flattened and shredded. The 2 e-readers were inside with their screens smashed. There were signs of a struggle that didn't occur in just one place. There was evidence that the couple tried to scare the bear away, but none of their preparation and none of their scare tactics worked. But the rescue team wasn't alone. They were being watched by the same grizzly. It stood just yards away, hidden by the trees. As they investigated the scene, they suddenly heard a crashing through the undergrowth. Turning their heads and spinning their flashlights around, they saw a grizzly bear emerging from the trees, illuminated by their flashlight beams. It ran into the clearing. It wasn't going to stop. This wasn't a mock charge. They only had one option. Pulling the trigger on a rifle, one of the rescue team shot the bear. It fell to the ground just feet from where they stood. Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived at the scene at 5 o'clock that morning. They carefully carried the victims away and sent the bear off for a necropsy. The investigation into the bear revealed that she was a 25-year-old female. She wasn't lactating at the time and wasn't tagged or known to the park rangers as a nuisance bear. She was in fairly good condition but with poor teeth and less than normal body fat for that time of year. Her behavior had been very aggressive. If a bear has attacked a person due to defense from being startled, then it usually leaves the area afterwards. But this bear remained nearby. Could this bear have been hunting the 2 hikers? Was this a predatory attack? Attacks by bears in Canada are rare, and predatory attacks exceedingly rare, with just 65 grizzlies in the park. The last known fatal attack occurred in 1973, when a heavily sedated bear charged at a biologist as it was being relocated and released. Of course, this tragedy has hit Doug and Jenny's family and friends hard. It is difficult to comprehend exactly what has happened and the sequence of events that led up to their deaths. Those who knew the couple are in a state of shock, and for it to have happened to such an experienced couple means that it can happen to anyone. Even after deploying 2 cans of bear spray onto the bear, it wasn't enough to stop the couple's terrifying final affliction.
The eastern coyotes in Cape Breton Highlands National Park are larger than their ancestors. This is because as the creatures migrated from the southwestern United States to Nova Scotia in the early 20th century, they interbred with wolves in Ontario and Quebec. Since then, the genetic heritage has been retained and the creatures have become more robust, similar to medium-sized German shepherds. Although they are opportunistic creatures, coyotes are formidable hunters. They can stalk and kill even the sturdiest moose thanks to their effectively formed packs and high intelligence. Additionally, they are highly adaptable and very curious. This allowed them to live near human settlements, scrounging for any available food sources. With that said, coyotes naturally fear humans and will avoid them most of the time. But if that's the case, how do you explain the attack? Coyote attacks are incredibly rare. However, they do happen. In many cases, encounters occur because the people fed the coyotes or were rescuing their free-roaming pets from an attack. Moreover, the presence of pups in the area may elevate the negative behaviors of these creatures. Nevertheless, there are some unusual cases when coyotes stalk and hunt a person, as is the case of Taylor Mitchell. Taylor Mitchell was an up-and-coming folk musician in Toronto, Ontario. At only 19 years old and fresh out of high school, she had made a name for herself in the Canadian folk music scene. Once she realized her immense passion for music, Taylor dove into songwriting and performed her songs in various venues around the country. Success found Taylor and she embraced it fully, signing a record deal with Back Road Tavern Productions. In 2009, she released her first album, For Your Consideration, which received positive reviews. This release was accompanied by a solo tour of Eastern Canada, something Taylor was excited about after recently acquiring a license and a car. On October 28th, Taylor was scheduled to play a show in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. However, she arrived 2 days early. With a lot of extra time on her hands, Taylor decided to hike in Cape Breton Highlands National Park, one of the most stunning spots on the island. It was a sunny afternoon at the park. Taylor was an environmentalist who had always loved nature walks. Hence, the intoxicating beauty of the area was a welcoming distraction amidst her busy schedule. The dozens of hiking trails and the 93,000 hectares of land were madly inviting. Taylor started walking through Skyline Trail, one of the most popular ones on the island. Looping across the Gulf of St. Lawrence and returning near the entrance, nothing could be more ideal for Taylor. Although many people visit the trail because of its gentle slope and fresh air, others take the opportunity to watch wild animals in their natural habitat. Taylor wanted to do both. She was excited at the prospect of seeing beautiful wildlife, but at the same time she wanted to take a break from the hustle of touring. At around 2:30 p.m., Taylor left her car in the parking lot and headed up an access road. This led to a clearing where the Skyline Trail began. Approximately 15 minutes into her walk, she passed by a couple walking in the opposite direction. Unfortunately, this was the last time Taylor was seen unscathed. As they headed further down the access road, the couple spotted 2 large coyotes heading in the opposite direction. One of the hikers photographed them. Shortly after, they noticed something unsettling. They heard loud cries in the distance. However, they couldn't tell if it came from a human or an animal. If given enough distance, a loud coyote howling sounds eerily like a human's cry. The couple was disturbed by this, so they rushed towards the parking lot and called 911 from an emergency phone. At around 3:15 p.m., the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were alerted, and immediately an ambulance was dispatched to the scene. Meanwhile, the coyotes had caught up with Taylor through the access road. The creatures growled fiercely, half charging at her in an attempt to make her run. This is typical predator behavior, as running down a frightened animal usually allows the hunters to bite the legs and the rear of the prey. The two coyotes didn't see Taylor as human. They saw her as prey that day. Finally succumbing to terror, Taylor retreated towards the trailhead, accidentally dropping her items along the trail. While she screamed for help, Taylor took out a small pocket knife in an attempt to fend off her attackers. However, the coyotes were in hunt mode. They pierced her down, biting her legs and fingers as she desperately swung at them. Taylor was no match for a coyote, let alone two of them. The coyotes managed to push Taylor back deep into the trail and onto the top of a hill. Unfortunately, she tripped and fell, prompting the coyotes to attack full on. The ferocious beast tore at her clothes, biting her head and legs, and continued doing so until she was severely wounded. Taylor desperately ran towards the bathroom, her own blood trailing behind her. She panicked as she tried to open the bathroom door while the relentless attacks continued. Not able to gain entry, she ran towards the trees where she finally fell down from blood loss and injuries. Taylor was alone and helpless, and the coyotes took advantage of this. Meanwhile, back at the access road, a group of hikers saw Taylor's belongings and knew something was wrong. They headed up the trail and found her camera, so they started yelling out, but to no avail. Heading to the end of the clearing, they noticed blood and extra clothing. They also noticed the bathroom door was smeared in blood. Going around the corner, they saw Taylor, and a lone coyote standing over her. The hikers charged at the coyote in an attempt to save Taylor. However, the creature showed no fear and was even aggressive towards them. The hikers attempted again, and finally, the coyote ran away, but only a short distance. It stood still a few meters away, growling in anger at the hikers. Taylor was conscious and spoke to her rescuers, but she was in critical condition. There were multiple bites on her head and legs, and tears on her flesh were bleeding profusely. Finally, an officer from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived and fired a shotgun at the animal, effectively driving it off. The officer didn't finish the animal, as he initially believed Taylor was attacked by a bear. Taylor was immediately transported to the hospital, but despite the doctor's best efforts to save her life, Taylor's injuries were too much. She died from blood loss shortly after. In an effort to comprehend what happened, multiple speculations sprung up on why Taylor was attacked. Some theorized Taylor accidentally approached a coyote den, provoking the attack. Meanwhile, some thought Taylor might have tried feeding the creatures. However, none of these suggestions were proven, prompting officials to reassess the dangers these creatures posed to humans in the park. Consequently, the rogue coyote had to be hunted down and the wardens began their search. Surprisingly, Taylor's mother didn't want that to happen. She claimed Taylor, being an environmentalist, wouldn't have wanted the death of the coyotes. We take a calculated risk when spending time in nature's fold. It's the wildlife's terrain, Taylor's mother said in a statement after the attack. Nevertheless, an aggressive female coyote had to be shot down after acting aggressively. This was followed by 3 more, including a large male near the Skyline Trail. Afterward, a thorough investigation revealed that 3 of the coyotes were involved in the attack, evidenced by Taylor's blood on their fur coats. Moreover, the large male coyote was the alpha photographed previously near the access road and was the one standing over Taylor when she was found. This was evidenced by the shotgun pellets on the animal's coat, fired by the officer from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The aggressive female and large male may have been a pair, and the other coyotes were their packmates. Later, around November 2009, a coyote approached a couple close enough that the man was able to hit it with a stick on the head. Additionally, 10 months after Taylor's attack, a 16-year-old girl was bitten on the head during a camping trip with her parents. This was very unusual coyote behavior, as they were generally seen as fearful of humans. However, experts weighing in on the issue stated that coyotes always lived close to humans. They were just undetected. Culling of the general coyote population was suggested. Still, experts opposed this, saying it wouldn't have any lasting effect as the creatures multiply tremendously quickly. One female coyote can give birth to 7 or more pups. Ultimately, Nova Scotia declared a $20 bounty on coyotes. However, this didn't apply to the park. Taylor's mother went on to establish the Taylor Mitchell Legacy Trust. This organization promotes community outreach for music and other art forms and educates people on habitat preservation. Although she met a tragic fate, Taylor was a beautiful soul who felt deeply passionate about music and the environment. The way Taylor's mother acted after the attack speaks volumes about how deeply she and her family understood the nature of nature. She may be gone from this world, but Taylor's beautiful music continues to live on despite the tragic and unfortunate story of her final affliction.
Germund Rosholt and his partner, 37-year-old Valerie Theoret, loved the outdoors. They were experienced in the wilderness and knew how to trap animals and live off the land. These were skills they wanted to impart to their 10-month-old daughter, Adele. In a world where technology dominates, they felt it was important to nurture their baby's innate interest in nature and the world around her. Valerie taught French immersion at an elementary school in Whitehorse, Yukon. She was much loved by those who knew her and was an active member of the Whitehorse community. In their spare time, the couple enjoyed exploring the wilderness. In 2015, they had bought a cabin which was situated northeast of Mayo. This is a remote, isolated community 250 miles north of Whitehorse. It was the perfect place to escape to. They had already spent 2 winter seasons there, and this would be their third, but their first with their new baby. In 2018, they flew into the area in the fall for their 3rd season in the cabin. They planned on staying there throughout the winter with their new baby until Valerie needed to return to her teaching job in the new year. But sadly, that would never happen. The young family had been there in the cabin for almost 3 months. They knew the risks of bears in the area, as it was a popular habitat for them. They took all the necessary precautions, making sure food was stored away appropriately and any waste was secured in bear-proof containers a distance away from their cabin. The couple survived their long stints in the wilderness largely by trapping animals. As the harsh winter began to set in and December was just around the corner, Valerie unintentionally let her guard down. Up until then, she had religiously carried bear spray whenever she left the cabin. But now that they were well into the winter and the harsh weather was setting in, she assumed bears would be hibernating and would no longer pose a threat until emerging in the spring. But she couldn't have been further from the truth, and in fact, any bears still awake during the winter are desperate bears. They likely have not fed enough to build the fat reserves to make it through the cold, dark winter months, and are more likely to launch a predatory attack as a result. This is exactly what happened. The 3 of them sat down on the morning of November 26, 2018. They ate breakfast together in their warm, snug cabin. It was the last time Germund would see his beloved girls alive. The log burner was crackling in the corner of the room. Outside, the light was growing in the gloomy sky. A chilly wind rustled the leaves in the trees. Germund said goodbye to Valerie and Adele and stepped outside. He was off to set trap lines in the surrounding woodland. It was part of their daily routine and something he enjoyed doing. Valerie cleaned up and wrapped herself and baby up in warm clothes before heading outside. She then pulled the baby carrier over her head and placed Adele inside it. The 2 of them opened the cabin door and went off for a walk. Adele's little head bobbed along as she was carried on her mother's back. The sounds of nature filled their ears. Being outside together was a magical time, and the baby was taking in all of her surroundings. The fresh air was calming, and Valerie walked along the path from their cabin. But she was unaware that the 2 of them were being watched. Only moments before, a male grizzly bear had been ambling along the same path, its huge paws leaving prints in the soft mud. When it heard the cabin door open, it leapt off the path and hid in the undergrowth. The bear was starving, an 18-year-old male that had lived its entire life in that territory. It was a desperate individual, and there was no way he would survive the winter. Instead, he became desperate and searched for any food he could find. Only the previous day, he had come across a porcupine and had devoured it in one go. The quills of the porcupine, however, had pierced the bear's gut, causing severe pain and damage. The bear could see Valerie and her baby leaving the cabin and crept along in the undergrowth behind them. It moved slowly but purposefully. It was stalking them. Each footprint from the huge predator was silent on the ground. Not a twig broke, not a leaf rustled. It was an expert hunter, a silent and deadly predator, and there was nothing Valerie could do to stop it. When the bear was within striking distance and Valerie was still unaware of what was directly behind her, it suddenly launched its attack. It broke into a full gallop when it was within a few yards of the two girls. Valerie turned just in time to see a flash of brown before she was catapulted to the ground. Her baby screamed as it was crushed under the weight of the enormous Grizzly and sandwiched between it and her mother. Valerie tried to kick the bear off, but she was pinned face down to the ground. Then came the fatal blow. The bear opened its jaws and bit down with crushing force behind the back of Valerie's head. The attack was over within seconds. There was little fight from Valerie, as the fatal blow had been delivered almost instantly. She had been caught completely unaware, and even if she had been carrying bear spray or a firearm, it is unlikely she would have had time to use them. Germund started heading home at mid-afternoon. He had set his traps and was happy with the work he had done. As he approached the cabin, he noticed fresh bear prints on the path. He immediately cocked his rifle. He followed the prints, which led worryingly towards the cabin. Then they veered off into the undergrowth. Germund scoured the scruffy brush for any signs of a bear and walked up to the cabin. He opened the door and called out to Valerie. There was no answer. He continued along the path towards their sauna, which was just along from the cabin. He thought Valerie and the baby may be warming up there. He clutched his rifle as he walked quickly, feeling a sense of danger in the air. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something didn't feel right. After walking cautiously down the path, Germund suddenly heard a low growl. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up on end. A shiver ran down his spine, and he felt his heart thundering in his chest. He knew what that sound meant. He was being watched, and he had surprised a grizzly bear, a bear that was defending its cache. In an instant, the bear suddenly rushed out of the undergrowth. It had been concealed by the bushes and trees lining the path Germund was walking along. He saw the flash of brown as it charged full pelt at him. Its ears were pinned back against its massive head, its jowls wet and jaws slightly agape. Germund didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired a shot. It hit the bear, but the beast kept running at him. He fired again, and twice more. He struck the bear in the chest, and it crashed down to the ground, skidding on the wet mud and landing at his feet. It was dead. Germund called out to his partner and daughter. He was desperate to find them and began searching the woodland running alongside the path. That's where he found them. Two motionless bodies lying on the path just 200 yards from where he had shot the bear. He rushed over to them, but tragically, it was too late. The grief he must have felt would have been immeasurable. To have their lives ripped away in an instant was heartbreaking, and Germund's life was turned upside down that day. Their enjoyment for the great outdoors had ended in tragedy, and for Germund to lose his young daughter as well before her life had really begun was almost too much to take. Officials performed a necropsy on the bear and reported how emaciated it was. It had been struggling to find food and had turned to people as a last resort. They warned that, although bears are usually hibernating from November through to February, some are still sighted in December and January. They want to change the narrative that bears aren't around during the winter. It is dangerous to let your guard down when you least expect bears to make an appearance. Despite this, officials also said that there was nothing Valerie could have done. Although it is a cliché, she and her daughter really were in the wrong place at the wrong time. A predatory bear is skilled at tracking its prey and sneaking up on it without being noticed. That is how it hunts. And whilst during a defensive attack, a bear will likely walk away once it sees the threat had been neutralized, during a predatory attack, its aim is to kill, and it won't stop until you meet your terrifying final affliction. At just 8 years old, Jeremy Williams attended his local Coyote elementary school, along with his 4-year-old brother Daniel. They were members of the native Coyote people. Their father also taught at the school in the isolated community on British Columbia's Vancouver Island. Belonging to a community steeped in tradition and rich in culture, Jeremy and Daniel were two of the 300 First Nation people living in the village. The rural, isolated community was situated 140 miles northwest of Victoria, surrounded by beautiful wilderness. Coyote is the most northwesterly contemporary settlement of the Nootka-speaking natives. It is a fishing village. The food of the ocean has provided for the community for generations. The First Nations people came there over 4,000 years ago. They were drawn by the rich sea life, natural resources, mild climate, and the beautiful surroundings. But in those surroundings were hidden dangers. Wild animals lurked. Most turned away at the first sight of a human, but for others, they were bold and brazen. They posed a real risk, especially to those who wandered off alone. The close proximity of the school to the wilderness was a concern for parents. They had repeatedly asked school governors to erect a fence around the school and its grounds. They knew that wild animals were common in the area, and they believed that it was only a matter of time before an attack on the school children. Sadly, they were right. During the recent weeks, there had been more and more cougar sightings on Vancouver Island. The cats were naturally curious animals, and some had little fear of humans. They approached walkers, cyclists, and even wildlife rangers. The advice was always to stand still, wave your arms above your head, and shout. Never turn your back on a cougar and try and throw something at it. Any small children should be picked up. Typically, they will run away. Usually, they are just interested in something you're carrying rather than you, such as food in your backpack. But if they see you as the prey, then that is a whole different story. A mountain lion that is stalking you is not merely curious, they want a meal. On a Tuesday morning in May 1992, Jeremy was playing with his brother Daniel and their two friends in the school playground. Their father, who was one of the teachers at the school, was inside the building. He could hear the children playing and would sometimes look out through the windows and catch his two boys running around with the others. But he wasn't the only one watching the children playing that morning. A cougar had been drawn to the shrieks and cries of the young children as they played outside during recess. Jeremy sat down on a grassy bank on the edge of the playground, whilst the other children continued to run around behind him. He looked out at the surrounding woodland, but he failed to spot the camouflaged cat in the undergrowth. The cougar locked its eyes onto the small boy. It was a female, just a yearling. She was likely hunting on her own for one of the first times. Mountain lions typically remain with their mothers until between the ages of 14 to 21 months. As a yearling, she can't have been independent for very long. She was an inexperienced hunter, but an opportunistic one of the most dangerous of her kind. Cougars are hypercarnivores, meaning that they only eat meat. In Yellowstone National Park, they compete with wolves for elk and deer. Elsewhere, they also hunt smaller mammals such as raccoons, porcupines, and wild turkeys. But they typically hunt at night or during dusk and dawn. So why was this one out in the day? Perhaps it had had an unsuccessful night on the hunt. Perhaps it was very, very hungry. The cougar crouched down low, her belly inches from the ground. Slowly, she crept forwards in the undergrowth, her footsteps silent on the ground, her eyes unblinking. Then she made a dash for it, suddenly running from the woodland towards the boy. She covered the open ground between Jeremy and herself in a second. A flash of brown caught Jeremy's eye, and he looked up and screamed as he saw the 60-pound, 27-kilogram mountain lion launch itself at him. He didn't have time to get up and run. It jumped on top of him, instinctively going for the neck. Her claws dug into his body, and the long canines pierced his throat as it mauled him. The other children screamed and all made a run for the school building. Some rushed inside, shouting for help. They knew their friend was in serious trouble. It was pandemonium. Jeremy was trying to fight back, but he was too small in comparison to the wild cat. He didn't stand a chance. The weight of her body pinned him down, and when she closed her jaws around his throat, he had just seconds to live. Kevin Williams, Jeremy's father, heard the chaos outside, and ran to the playground. There, he saw his eldest son underneath the beige-brown cat, his head in its jaws. He ran at the mountain lion, yelling and shouting, trying desperately to distract it and scare it away. He tried to find something to throw at it as he rushed forwards, but time was running out. Although only seconds passed in reality, time seemed to stand still. The attack seemed to go on forever, with Kevin feeling powerless to stop it. Then the school janitor, also hearing the terrified screams of the school children, came running outside with his rifle. He lifted it, took aim, and fired a single shot. The cougar collapsed on the ground next to the youngster, but it was too late. It had already delivered its fatal bite. There was nothing Kevin could do for his son. He held the boy, limp in his arms, whilst his 4-year-old son, Daniel, Jeremy's younger brother, watched on. The death of one of their own shook the close-knit Coyote community. It was a tragedy that could so easily have been avoided. Richard Leo, a Coyote Indian chief, told the authorities that parents were furious at the school board for not protecting the children from the threat of wild animals. There weren't just cougars out there were bears and wolves. Richard said that no pupils would be returning to the school until they had assurances that a fence will be erected around its grounds. Being surrounded by prime cougar and bear habitat, their children needed to be kept safe. A dozen children were in the playground that day. They witnessed one of their friends being killed right before their eyes. And for Daniel, he had watched in horror as his older brother was mauled just feet from where he stood. Professional counseling was provided for those children, and there was an outpouring of support from the local community. It was a tragedy that will never be forgotten by those in Coyote. There are some 4,000 cougars in the whole of Canada, 3,500 of which are found in British Columbia. Vancouver Island has the highest concentration of cougars in the world, with around 800 calling the island home. In the past 100 years, 5 people have lost their lives to the mountain lions in British Columbia. Surprisingly, all but one of these occurred on Vancouver Island. During the same period, 29 non-fatal attacks occurred in British Columbia, 20 of which were on the island. The majority of these were on children under the age of 16. Although these attacks are devastating for all involved, they are actually exceedingly rare. But it is the elusiveness of the cougars that makes them so terrifying, knowing that they are out there and that they are born predators with the ability to take down a 600-pound moose. Most Canadians will never see one, but for those that do, it often comes along with their terrifying final affliction. On November 8, 2005, 22-year-old Kenton Joel Carnegie was nearing the end of his semester at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, where he was studying geological engineering. He had been offered an internship at a uranium mining company called Point North Landing in the Saskatchewan province to the northeast, and he was ecstatic at the opportunity to work at such an esteemed company at the start of his career. However, the uranium mine was over 900 miles, or 1,500 kilometers away from his college, and was located practically in the middle of nowhere. It was surrounded by hundreds of miles of wilderness and wildlife, and the nearest city was more than 2 hours away. The area was home to a variety of geographical features, with lakes, rivers, thick forests, as well as snowy plains in the winter. It also hosted wildlife like the black bear, lynx, moose, and a species of gray wolves called the timber wolves that were the apex predator of this frozen wilderness. Kenton arrived at the plant and settled in one of the camps close to the other miners for the duration of his internship. He was a nature lover and would sometimes want to venture out further into the woods to explore and have some time to himself away from the camp settlement. For a few days, he was given permission by his superiors to go for a walk on the edges of the plant premises, but was warned not to venture too deep into the woods. On November 8th at 5:30 p.m., Kenton left the plant after being allowed to go for a walk on the outskirts of the area. He told one of his fellow campmates that he would be back by 7 p.m., just before supper time. The sun was setting and it would soon be dark. Kenton decided to walk half a mile to a nearby lake and enjoy the sunset beside the shore before heading back to the camp. He spent a few minutes at the place and spared just enough time to walk back while it was still light out. Looking at the thick forest ahead of him and the collecting snow that made it difficult to walk, Kenton took his first steps toward the camp. It was difficult to walk, and he was forced to take longer strides to make up for his slow pace. It was around this time that he had an unnerving realization. He heard as if something was following him from behind. He felt he was being watched from among the tall frozen trees. Kenton glanced back and noticed a single wolf a few yards away. He looked at it for a few seconds, trying to gauge its intentions. The wolf did not seem immediately threatening, so he decided to continue walking, hoping it would go away. As he turned his head back forward, Kenton realized there was a second wolf in front of him. He now felt trapped and was not as calm as he was before. His heartbeat quickened, and he realized the sky was getting darker every minute. The wolves had encircled him in a cynical and deliberate fashion. Footsteps later indicated that Kenton was being followed from the time he had left the camp. Panic now started to set in, and combined with the urgency of time, Kenton Joel did the last thing he should have done in his circumstance. He started running. His quickened pace emboldened the two wolves to start following him. Kenton realized he was now locked in a chase against a forest predator, and was not as naively optimistic of its intentions as before. Two more wolves joined the pack, running behind Kenton as he screamed in terror, still a kilometer away from safety. The adrenaline, fear, and the thick snow beneath his feet made it impossible to outrun the predators, who were fighting on their own turf and outnumbering him 4-1. One wolf finally caught onto him and drew the first blood by biting on the side of his torso. Kenton started bleeding, leaving behind a trail of bloodstains on the white snow behind him. His cries for help were heard by nobody, and he was now fighting for his very life. The wolves closed onto him and took a second bite at his thigh in an attempt to stop his attempt to escape. He finally fell to his knees, still trying to crawl out of danger. The pack started circling him in a demented fashion, striking terror into Kenton's heart in his final moments. As one of the wolves leapt at him, he started to punch and fight it off. After the entire pack jumped on him at once in the frenzy of a successful hunt, Kenton's fate was all but sealed. One of the wolves plunged its sharp teeth straight into his thigh. The other took a bite at his right hand. Kenton momentarily escaped their grip, and the footsteps later discovered show that he managed to limp ahead a few steps, trying to get to safety. But he was soon caught again. He was now breathless, and his limbs had now become numb from fear. This time, the wolves did not spare him, biting out chunks of his flesh from all over his body until he finally stopped moving and died. Back at the plant, his campmates waited for him to come back. At 7:30, after half an hour passed expecting his return, they were now concerned for his safety. A group of workers decided to go find Kenton in the forest in their pickup truck. Wolf sightings in the area were not uncommon, but when they noticed Kenton's footprints in the snow being followed by paw prints, concern now set in about a possible wolf attack. They headed back to the plant to grab a rifle before continuing their search for Kenton. Not far from the plant premises, they noticed a dark spot in the white snow path ahead. It was nighttime at this point, and they drove further toward it to get a closer look. They realized it was a pile of bloodied clothes, hosting a mangled and dismembered human body. It was now clear what had happened. The plant workers picked up a pile of bones and flesh and loaded it onto the truck. While getting back into the truck, one of the truckers reported seeing 2 sets of glowing eyes in the distance behind the trees. Wolf howls were also heard in the distance as they were driving back, confirming suspicions that the attack had been carried out by the forest wolves. The investigations following the attack revealed that the wolves had come dangerously close to the plant premises because of the incorrect food disposal method used at the site. Metal containers outside the building had been filled with food scraps, wrappers, and leftovers, inviting the attention of nearby hungry wolves. This had made their encounters with humans more frequent, eroding their fear of humans and seeing them as potential prey. The incident called for several changes to be made to how the plant processed wasted food, but the area was declared safe for operations in the limited premises of the plant after the installation of an electric fence. A drive to cull the dangerous wolves began, and their population was pushed back several miles from the plant's site. Kenton Joel's parents were devastated at the news of his brutal death. There was not much left of Kenton's body to return to his family, and they were left inconsolable at the memory of their beloved son. Kenton's family, along with the administration at the University of Waterloo, set up a memorial scholarship in his honor and wished no parent would have to witness a repeat of this heart-wrenching tragedy. A vicious pack of man-eating wolves taking an innocent person to meet their final affliction. On May 14, 1978, 4 boys between the ages of 12 and 18 had gone out for a relaxing day of fishing in the Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario, Canada. 18-year-old Richard Rindress and his younger brother William had invited 12-year-old George Halfkenny along with his 14-year-old brother Mark to practice fishing in the Radiant Lake in northeastern Ontario. It was a calm lake surrounded by pristine wilderness and thick forests. The water hosted trout, bass, and a variety of smallmouth fish. The wider park had several species of mammals, including moose, deer, and beavers. But among the trees lurked a predator. The famed black bear was known to inhabit the deeper forest, but seldom had encounters with humans. The large furry mammal could weigh over 450 pounds, 200 kilograms, and stand taller than an average human on 2 feet. They weren't known to be aggressive unless provoked, and usually kept to themselves deep among the forest wildlife. It was early summer in Canada, and the warm heat of the sun had created an ideal fishing escape among the trees. The fish were plentiful. The boys parked their car near the Radiant Lake and ventured off for catch. It was a serene experience for the young boys as the summer sun heated the once frozen trees and lakes, making hungry fish resurface and take the baits. The entire day went by, and the boys were ecstatic with their catch. A few hours later, the sky started turning blue as sunlight faded and evening set in. Unknown to them, an apex predator's eyes had been locked on them from among the dense trees. A hungry black bear had ventured too close near the lake where the boys had been fishing. The dark forest, aided by the dimming sunlight, helped the black bear camouflage itself in the background. The ambush predator stalked the boys along the trees and was aided by the silent crunch of the cold, wet leaves that littered the forest floor. As dark set in, the 4 boys headed back to their car to sort out their catch before leaving. Parked a few hundred meters from the lake, the young boys were preparing to drive away. George Halfkenny, tempted by the good catch throughout the day, decided to give it one more try before the sky went completely dark. He decided to walk to the lake alone after telling the other boys he would be back in a few minutes, and cast his hook one last time into the clear waters, hoping to catch a big one to take home. But by this time, 12-year-old George Halfkenny had become an object of interest for the giant black bear lying in wait among the trees. Caught alone and unable to defend himself, George was quietly ambushed from behind by the forest predator. as it stood on two hind legs and slammed its feet onto the young boy's fragile torso. George could only let out a light squeal, unheard by any one of his friends, before being dragged away by the massive bear. He died a quick death, but his final moments were in terror and pain as the bear towered over the young boy before breaking his neck using its body weight. A few minutes passed and George had still not returned. The boys had been waiting for him and wanted to leave before night set in. They called his name from afar into the dark, empty forest, but there was no response. Something was eerily wrong, and every passing minute made them concerned for George's safety. William and Mark finally decided to walk to the edge of the lake shore and look for George. There was no sign of him, but their cries and calls for their friend were heard by something else. The predatory black bear had been alerted by the sounds and decided to leave George's body in the woods to come back for more. This time for William and Mark. The boys were now worried and trembling from the fear and cold. This is when they made the fatal mistake of going deeper into the trees to look for him. Walking among the bush trail and tight forest, Mark separated from William, trying to find his lost brother. The bear appeared from between the trees, and Mark quickly found himself jumped by a mass of black fur. The bear ended his life in a similar fashion, breaking his neck with its body weight before dragging him away into the forest. The little boy could offer little resistance and died a quick death. The area once again fell silent, and William realized something was terribly wrong. His heart started racing, and he let out cries of help, calling on his friend and brother. The bear now had 2 dead bodies, but was not done with the hunt. William was alone. He was now deep in the predator's area and hopelessly lost and vulnerable. 16-year-old William was terrified out of his senses and tried running to safety among the confusing maze of forest trees. The giant black bear again started chasing him, stealthily following his voice and scent. A brief chase, and William was ambushed from behind by the black bear in a similar way it had killed Mark and George. The frail young boy was no match for the bear's massive weight, its sharp claws or biting teeth. He succumbed to the attack in a few seconds and became an addition to the pile of dead bodies that the bear had been collecting after dragging them into the forest. 18-year-old Richard Rindress awaited the return of the other 3 boys and was left puzzled by the sudden silence that befell the scene after their calls for George could no longer be heard. The boys seemed to disappear, one after the other, in an eerie fashion, with no idea of what happened to them. Reluctantly, he walked further a few meters close to the shoreline in hopes of finding a sign of his brother and friends, but to no avail. He noticed only a dropped fishing pole beside the water, surrounded by a thick forest. It was the dark of night, and Richard was too unnerved to dare venture deeper into the woods for fear of meeting a similar fate as the other boys. He hastily ran back to the car to go and find help from local residents and authorities to locate his friends. A search party was organized, and several armed men spread into the forest trying to find the missing young boys. A few hours later, the bodies of George, Mark, and William were finally found, huddled close to one another. They were still uneaten, but piled together by the bear in a cynical fashion. A few feet away in the bushes, a large black bear was spotted guarding its kill. The boys had all been killed in a similar way, with a quick snap of the neck, with the massive weight of the black bear stomping with its front legs. It was a terrifying sight, and left researchers perplexed why the bear had carried out the predatory attack and not consumed any of the bodies of the young boys. It was thought that the bear may have been tempted by the smell of the dead trout that George had been carrying in his pocket, but could not find it. The young boys had planned their fishing trip at the last time they should have, in the new summer heat when the black bears were more likely to come closer out of the forest to search the lakes for fish. The 275-pound black bear was shot dead by the authorities, but the news of the brutal demise of the 3 young boys sent shockwaves across Canada and devastated their parents and families beyond consolation. No one expected a killer black bear to be roaming the forest, stalking the 3 young boys, and leading them to their terrifying final affliction.